Good morning and welcome to Great Tree Zen Women's Temple. This morning our speaker is Koun Franz, the Reverend. I'm stuck here. Let's see if we can get it. So did I say this was Great Tree?
Yes.
First, we'd like to ask Tejo to do the opening sutra.
And unsurpassed, penetrating and perfect Dharma is rarely met with even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to, remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's teaching.
And now a brief statement on Dhamma. In Buddhism, when Zen practitioners share their understanding of the teachings and practice, it is offered freely as a practice of Dana Paramita. Dana is a Pali word that means generosity or to give freely, and this practice is done without expectation of getting something in return. This is the spirit of speaking about the Dharma. Other ways to practice Dana is to offer support to those who share the teachings, to support places of spiritual practice, and to give without judgment or expectation when opportunities arise. Those who share their teachings at Great Tree do so on a Dana basis. Please support their practice by giving what you can. And I put the Reverend's information in the chat for anyone who would like it. And if you need his address to send a check instead, please let me know.
Okay.
They're in here somewhere. Not together this morning for some reason or other.
Yeah, she usually is more together than this, just so that you- this morning for some reason.
Okay. This morning, our speaker is Koun Franz, and his topic is, what is a mountain seed ceremony? The Reverend Koun Franz trained at
Zuioji.
Zuioji. She had me practice that. And Shogoji monasteries in Japan, where he lived for 12 years. From 2006 to 2007, he served in a residential priest at the Anchorage Zen Community in Alaska. He has been in Halifax, Nova Scotia with Thousand Harbours Zen, formerly Zen Nova Scotia, since 2013. Welcome, Reverend.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is a pleasure. So
I want to say something.
oh, please.
Sorry, I was going to say, I just wanted to explain to everybody, next year we're hoping to have a mountain seat ceremony. This is something that, is kind of a recognition of someone as the abbot or the abbess of a temple. And we haven't done it because we could never afford it in the past. So we're kind of combining it with our 20th anniversary. And so I've invited a few people to speak about this, to kind of explain what it's about. People who have, you've had the mountain seat ceremony?
Me?
Yeah.
No, we're also planning for next year.
Oh, right. That's right. So anyway, I think the date that is put out there is September 7th, although they said we have to let them, they can't plan more than a year out. So we have to wait until September to get a final on it and everything. So anyway, I asked Koun to talk about it because he knows more about it than I do. So thank you.
Thank you. So I wanted to talk today. I thought looked at the title, "What is a mountain seat ceremony?" And I realized that this is a conversation that's been going on in your community for a long time. As Tejo said, that for years, this has been on people's minds, it's been on your radar, and I'm not really sure where I am in that conversation. But I wanted to speak to two parts of it. One has to do with, I guess, part of my sense of the meaning of it. And then the other is something more about how it feels. There's a progression that a priest follows that starts with ordination. Ordination is it's often treated as a public ceremony, but really it's between a teacher and a student. It's a kind of invitation by one priest to someone else to enter a path. So it can be done in front of an entire community, or it can be done very, very quietly. And after that ceremony, someone goes to a monastery. And what we refer to this process of entering the monastery as, we say, jozan. Jozan means to go up the mountain. The mountain is the monastery. The mountain has always been the monastery. All temples have a mountain name. So when we ascend that mountain, when we go up, we walk into this space that is, at that stage, a space of training, a space of cultivation, a space for education. There is, you might be familiar with the story of the Dragon Gate, that that at the bottom of the sea, there's a gate, and fish swim through this gate. And when they emerge on the other side of the gate, they're dragons. But the wonder of that, the beauty of that, is that they still look like fish, and they swim like fish, and they don't know that anything has happened. And yet, we say now they're dragons. And we use this idea of the Dragon Gate to talk about this monastery, this mountain that we enter, and there's something that happens that we may think we understand in the moment, but probably we don't. And when we leave the monastery, we say it's gezan, it's leaving the mountain, it's going back down the mountain. In the middle of that time, there's another ceremony. This one is attended by a lot of fellow monks, nuns. In English, we refer to it as the Dharma combat ceremony. And this is, unlike this ordination ceremony, which is so intimate between teacher and student, is a kind of public recognition or recognition among peers, that you know something of the mechanics of how the mountain works. You're able to function in the mountain. You're able to make the mountain, the machine of the mountain, move. And then you go back down. You go back into the world. And at some point later, some very difficult to define moment later, there is another very, very private ceremony with your teacher in which you receive what we usually call transmission. This private recognition that now you are in a position to welcome someone into this world, to send someone up that mountain. And often that's where the process stops. But there's this one more step. And the one more step is what we call Shinsan-shiki, which is the mountain seat ceremony. Shin means to ascend again, but it's a different character than when we go up as a monk, as a novice. And this ceremony, unlike all the ceremonies before, it's not invited by a teacher. It's not invited by your peers of monks and nuns. It's made possible by the community that you're in. It's the community that invites you to this next place, that starts to recognize you as what? As the mountain. The mountain itself. When you're in Japan, if you meet someone who is the abbot or the abbess of a temple, that person is usually referred to by their temple name. So for example, my teacher, my root teacher is Kosoku Honda. But people don't call him Kosoku-san or Honda-san. When they meet him, they call him Ganzoji-san because his temple is Ganzoji. His personal identifiers, once he takes on that role, mean less. And he becomes synonymous with the temple, with the mountain itself. So that when you speak to him, you understand that you're not speaking just to him. You're speaking to something more. There is something so profound, so powerful in the opportunity of this ceremony, where the community is able to look at the person who has, in many cases, always been there. And say, we see not just who you are, we see what you are. We see that when you breathe, this temple breathes. And we see that when the temple breathes, you breathe. We see that you are a mountain that someone else can climb, where someone else can be cultivated, where someone else can be trained, where someone else can be educated. We see the solidity of you and the scale of you. We see that when you went down the mountain so many years ago, that the mountain came with you. And just like with the Dragon Gate, in that invitation and in those ceremonies, on one level, nothing changes at all. The next day, the schedule continues as it has always continued. Nothing moves, nothing shifts. But hopefully, in the coming together around this, a community can make a shift in their understanding of what they see, not just in the abbot or the abbess, not just in that individual, but in recognizing the temple as a mountain, in recognizing that that building is more than a building, that it is all the buildings. Just as we would say that the robe, that there is only one robe, and it is the Buddha's robe, we can say that there is just one temple. And it is every temple. So that when you walk into that space, you are walking into a space that is more than those four walls. It is the tradition, and it is the teachings, and it is the depth that they offer. It's not measured by feet or inches. It's not located in one place in space. It lives and it breathes and has a continuity. And in establishing a mountain, we establish an aspiration that one day someone else will take up the mantle of that mountain. That this face of the mountain will continue to reveal itself generation after generation after generation. That's one idea that I have about it. But the fact is that over the years, I've had a lot of ideas about it. I've seen these ceremonies over and over again in Japan. And in some ways, they have become the face of some of my own process in the tradition, my struggles in the tradition. You know, when I first came to this, when I was first ordained, when I first climbed that mountain, I thought a lot of it was ridiculous. I had come to this, like so many people do, through books and through Zazen and through an idea of the purity of the practice, that there is just this one thing, this very one clean thing. And then suddenly I was wearing these robes that are kind of cumbersome and weird. And I was being sent up this mountain and I was dressed in this special outfit that you wear just in that one situation. And then I was learning to, one of the ones that sticks out for me is one morning helping in the kitchen, and there were something like 17 altars in one of the monasteries, and there's a certain cup of tea and a certain cup of rice that you put in front of every altar in the morning, and it has to be done in a particular order, and it has to be the right cup for each altar. And the feeling, as this person was explaining to me, of leaving my body and thinking, I wish I could leave this place entirely. This makes no sense to me. What is this? I'm here in the kitchen learning about cups while everyone else is doing Zazen. There's a better way. That's how I felt for a while. But I was in it for a long time, and I was in Japan for a long time. And so I would go through this other thing where I would bow and bow and bow and bow, and I would start to become immersed in the flavor of that and in the kind of religious feeling of this practice. And I would step out of that idea about purity, and instead I would hear the chanting and I would see everyone else bowing, and I would listen to the bells as they rang through the room, and I would feel such connection and such joy. And I would say, this is it. This, I get it now. It's so much more than what I thought it was. And after I left the monastery, this would continue as I would attend these ceremonies, these same mountain seat ceremonies, which are, from a Soto Zen perspective, high ritual. Someone usually only does this once in their lifetime, and a temple only does this once in a generation. A lot of priests come together. There's a lot of formality. There's a lot of decorum. There's a lot of stuff that feels very, 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 very extra. And I would participate in these ceremonies, and often I would have that religious feeling of, this is it. This is it. I want everyone to see this. And then I would come back to North America, and I would have distance from it, and I would watch a friend doing these ceremonies on Zoom, and I would think from a distance, I don't want that. That doesn't feel right to me. And I say all this because I want to acknowledge that for any community taking up the work of putting together something like this, something that is not only big in scale, but almost by definition, very, very, very different and much more formal than your ordinary activities. I want to address the ambivalence. That when you sit in committee meetings and someone lays out for you, we need this many priests, and we need these objects, and we need to be able to use the space in this way. That we can go to a place of thinking, why are we doing this? What's the point? What's really happening? When I have felt that deep connection to the tradition, to the religious side of the tradition, to the formal part of the tradition, I have felt great clarity in that stance. And when I have felt like I want to reject all of it and just sit in a cave, I have also felt great clarity in that. And what I want to offer up for all of you, and this is a pep talk from myself too, because we're planning the same things, is that clarity, that powerful sense of I know exactly what I'm doing and why, has nothing to do with this practice at all. But the question you might feel of, what's the point? That has possibility. In my work outside of the temple, I work as a counselor, and as part of that work, sometimes I do couples counseling. And it's amazing. And what I see over and over and over again is that we want so badly to find clarity. We want to understand, why is the other person doing what they do? Why do they keep saying that? Why do they keep doing that? Right? We come in and we have a story and we say, I know what I need. Why doesn't the other person understand what I need? Or they come in and they say, there was a fight last week, and this is what the fight meant. And in all of this, we lose sight of the intimacy of not knowing what we're doing. I ask people sometimes, when have you felt the most connected with your partner? And a number of couples have told me it's sometime right after, usually the birth of their first child. Right? And if we press on that a little bit, what we find is that there's often this kind of overwhelming joy, right? There's this overwhelming sense of, wow, look at us, we did it. And then there's this other moment where two people look at each other and they feel together the depth of what they have taken on. That they have no idea how to do this or what it means, but that now they are all in. And that doesn't feel necessarily good or bad. It just feels like vast, open, terrifying space shared. That's the not knowing. That's the same not knowing that we talk about in this practice, in these teachings. There must be moments right now, maybe even as I'm talking about this, where you're working on the idea of these ceremonies in your head and you're thinking, what is this? And a year from now, or a year and a half from now, in September, when you're standing in that room, or you're watching on Zoom and you're watching all these monks in procession and you're seeing all this happening, I promise you there will also be another moment when you think, what is this? And I just want to encourage you, when you have that moment, to not go chasing for an answer, not go looking for the thing that makes it clear, but to rest instead in the question, to allow for the intimacy of that question. Because that's what this practice is. And the more we take on as a community and the deeper we dive in, the more we get to connect with the question of that. The what? That mystery is, it's present now in your planning, and it's going to become more and more and more present over the coming months. And I hope you welcome it, because I think it's a gift. And that's where I'll stop. And maybe then we can just open it up.
Thank you.
I think you blew us away.
We can also talk about
Well,
whatever is on people's mind. Yes, somebody.
I want to share one thing with you. You know, Chimio,
Yeah.
you know, everybody knows Chimio, right?
Mm.
She's been wanting to do this ever since she heard about it, you know,
Mm.
and I kept thinking about how expensive it was going to be. and we had to pay the mortgage, so that
Right.
it was kind of not on the table. And then I started to, one day, I sort of had a kind of a little clarity about, wow, this is really something, it's a marker, you know, and how am I going to pass it on if I haven't done it? So I said to her, well, okay, let's do it. And so she thought we had to make a 25-row okesa for this.
Right. Right.
And so I said, well, you don't really have to. And I said, most places don't have that, you know? And she said, well, I want to do it. And so I said, okay. I thought, well, this would be a good way to bring the community together, you know?
Yeah.
And so she orchestrated this 25-row kesa. And I took it out to Minnesota, and people in Minnesota put stitches in it. Mrs. Katagiri put stitches in it. And everybody here, she had sewing every Saturday. And she said, well, when are we going to do the ceremony? And I said, well, as soon as the okesa is finished. And so then COVID came, but the okesa was finished. So it's been a very interesting kind of Sangha process. And I really appreciate that you made those comments about how it brings the Sangha together, because that's kind of how I've seen it myself. But I think that's a very valuable aspect of this particular ceremony, you know. So, well, thank you for that and everything else you said. But anybody have some comments? Chris, it looks like maybe you have something to say.
Can I if I may, I want to jump in, because I feel, Tejo, that you're saying something important about, you know, if I don't do this, how do I pass it on? And also to say that there is something very profound in, of course, doing this the first time in a temple. It's part of I mean, obviously Great Tree has been there a long time, but it is in a sense part of the founding of the temple still, as if that's been going on this whole time. But then when it happens the next time, then it's really different. And this, of course, is I've never seen these ceremonies done for the first time in a temple, because in Japan, I'm doing this in temples that are 600 years old. But there's something very, very beautiful and very subtle that happens where the previous abbot is able to step in and say, essentially, I'm not the mountain anymore. This person is the mountain. And the whole community in that moment, whatever their relationship has been to that other person, usually the temple's son, is able to say, yeah, we see you now. We can hold you in the same way. And in that story, the next day, something really is very different. It's very different. In a way that every time has surprised me a little bit, because in those temples often you're the role of abbot is being transferred from someone who seems, who is old and has become kind of venerable in the community, to someone that maybe everyone watched grow up from the time they were a kid, and watch them make all sorts of stupid mistakes, and watch them rebel, and watch them push back, and now they're standing, and there's this, and it's such a defining moment of trust. And I would wish that moment for any community, because everyone feels it. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Thank you. Most of my experience is in the Catholic Church,
Right.
the Catholic convent. And the convent where I was a Benedictine convent. And they elect a new abbess every 6 years, or a new prioress,
Interesting.
And in the investiture, that same kind of thing happens, where the former abbess or prioress is passing it on, and the new one stands up and says, "This is what I'm going to do going forward." Yeah. And then the other prioress leaves for a period of time in order not to get in the way of. Right. But yeah, I think that's a very important point about when there's a shift, the new person is being, embraced by the community. That's a very important moment. Yeah. Because then the community, the Sangha, and the practice become the driving force, or the path, Exactly. And it's not about the persons as much. That's right. It's the role. Yes. Right? And even more, when we have that continuity and we can see it moving across generations, often we see, for example, that the new abbot is wearing the same robes as the previous abbot, right? That they're literally wearing the uniform, and that there's something about the role that transcends the individual, and you can see that in very concrete ways that are again really an opportunity for a community to think about what all of it means, and to let go, I think, of the idea that it all rests on one person's shoulders. Yes.
Yes. How many monks are required to have the ceremony? How many need to be present?
There need to be 12 in total. There needs to be there's the abbot, who is becomes the hodoshi, and then there's a shuso, so someone who is part of the ceremonies include the Dharma combat ceremony. So a senior monk who is moving up in that way, and then 10 other priests. The priests don't all have to be transmitted priests. They can be at any level of ordination, but in total you need to have 12 people in the room in order for this to kind of check all the boxes on the administrative side, if that's the goal.
Yeah, thank you.
And it's hard, right? Because in Japan, again, when I've attended these ceremonies, you could almost ride around on a bicycle and gather up 12 monks in the course of an hour just by going from temple to temple in the same neighborhood and saying, hey, come on over, we're going to do this thing. It's not difficult at all. And so those ceremonies might have not 12, but 30 or 40 or 50 monks, because everybody's just free on a Saturday. And why not? Whereas, you know, at a place like Great Tree, and we feel this very deeply here in Halifax, Nova Scotia, right? Every single person other than me who is part of these ceremonies is an import. And that is, it's complicated and it can be costly. It requires a kind of courage, because you're spending a certain currency with other people in the Zen community. You're saying, will you come and do this and support us in this way? And for me, at least, I always have a hesitation about putting myself out there in that way and saying, can you help? So for me, this is a learning. There's a learning curve to this. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. I really enjoyed your talk. And I mean, I just find it so interesting with the forms. I've struggled with certain forms a lot over the years, and with the mountain seat ceremony, with the 17 cups of tea, you know, at some point, certain temples and choose to change these things, right? Like they shift.
Right.
I mean, one
Right.
thing I struggle with is the super pre-dawn meditation. And so I'm really
Yeah.
drawn to going to a temple who starts a little later. You know, I mean, it's just simple
Right.
things. And
Right.
and I really appreciate what you said about sitting with the unknowing and the question, but then there comes a point where like this just doesn't work.
Mm.
I'm just throwing that question out there. You know, I know there's a whole Soto Zen administration that requires this, and there must be some adherence to that for the ceremony to be accepted, I think. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not sure, but
Right.
that's what I'm
Right.
guessing.
Right.
So I don't know if I'm really asking anything. I mean, just I think the question's so interesting of when things shift in the form. What if they're, you know, what if you went and said, I really think 10 cups of tea work better, you know, or I don't know. It's
Right.
just interesting.
Right. Well, yes, and that opens up a really big can of worms, because you know, of course, in the however many decades that Zen has been trying to find footing here, there's been this discussion. How do we make this fit here? How do we make it make sense here? And there's, even right now today, last Friday was the very first board meeting of what's called Soto Zen North America, which is a new organization that is kind of tasked with one day taking over these administrative duties in North America from the headquarters. And a big part of that discussion has always been, even specifically with these ceremonies, 12 monks? Can we, right? Is that reasonable to ask? In California, it is, because you can throw a rock and hit a priest. But in much of North America, it seems like too great a burden. And so, what I would say to that is that it's always a slow conversation, but that conversation actually has been active, and that there is movement, and that even around these particular ceremonies we're talking about, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I think we will see that they are starting to take a different shape. I think that's true. but I don't have any guarantees yet.
Thank you. That makes
Mm.
Well,
sense.
you know, I want to make a comment about this Soto Zen North America,
Mm.
this, you know, American kind of taking over that from the Japanese organization. That I worked on some of the standards because I think part of the issue was that it was just some of the standards that were expected of Japanese just didn't work for us, this question.
Mm.
And so I was working on some of the standards with a couple, well, one person from San Francisco Zen Center and another person, well, Zuiko, Reading. And
Yeah.
what we kept, and I was at Tassajara in addition to practicing in Japan, so I kind of know the San Francisco experience too. And we found that there weren't that many that we really felt needed to be changed. Some of
Yeah.
them were like no-brainers, but we
Mhm.
were like, but we experienced this, and this is a very valuable experience to have. So to have these certain standards, you know, gives people the opportunity to have this experience. So
Yeah.
it'll be very interesting to see how this happens going forward with this new organization. And, you know, assuming that students of people who are part of that will follow these standards, it'd be interesting to see what will happen going forward.
Right. I agree, and I'm on that board, so now it's very much in my mind all the time. And one thing that's top of mind for me is that, for example, this very arbitrary seeming number of 12 is not arbitrary. It's a callback to platform ordination, which was the mode of ordination prior to Dogen even. So there's something happening there that's being referenced in these ceremonies, and knowing that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to keep doing it that way, but also it's easy when we start tweaking things to then forget what it was in the first place, or you know, what we were trying to do. And I that part is, it's a really interesting creative corner of this, but it's also very tricky.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, everybody doesn't have to follow this, you know?
That's right.
But I hope that we don't lose it
Me too.
by kind of not really appreciating what the origin of it is. I think
Yeah.
it's a little difficult because, you know, I mean, having grown up in the Catholic Church and then kind of having moved away from all of that, I realized that there's a lot of stuff that just got accumulated over the years through cultural kind of things that really don't have any particular meaning. It's just, it becomes a sort of a custom over the years.
Yeah.
And I always felt that that was probably, well, definitely true, you know, of Japanese culture, Japanese Zen being brought to America. And one of the reasons I went to Japan was because I wanted to be able to kind of parse that out for myself, you know,
Right.
what is just an overlay of Japanese culture, and what is, you know, has the tradition has real deep meaning that what we'd like to pass forward, and the experience. And I felt like Kadagiri Roshi couldn't do that because he was too embedded in Japanese culture. But honestly, I have a big struggle doing that myself. And
Yeah.
I don't want to lose like what you're talking about, the meaning that's there. But and I saw it when Chima went to Japan, I said, see if you can figure that out. See if you can figure out, you know, and we'll talk about it, you know.
Yeah.
And it's important, but I think it's also not important not to lose that deeper meaning and deeper experience.
Well, and for me, this circles back to what I was talking about before, which is that I think the danger here is that we make a decision about it, and then in that decision we decide, now I know, right? Now I've figured it out, and in the figuring it out, I think we lose something. You know, one of my teachers in Japan, before I moved to Alaska the first time, I went to him and I just said, because I had assisted with a lot of funerals, but I'd never officiated a funeral. And I said, could you just kind of take me through funerals? Because I want to make sure that I do them right when I go to North America. And he looked at me and he said, why? He said, just make it up. It's North America. He's like, why would anyone in North America want a Japanese funeral? And I thought there was something so loose in the way that he was holding that I think is a nice kind of counterbalance to this other side, where we're trying so hard to make sure that we do it in the same way that our teacher did it, in the same way that our teacher's teacher did it, right? That we can hold both of these things at the same time. Chris, I think you were going to say something, maybe.
Yeah, I was just going to say that tradition is good. I guess it's like continuation. So on the one side, tradition, and like everything, it's got to be a middle way type of thing, I guess. Well, I don't know anything. I've been to one mountain seat ceremony, and they can be very, well, they're wonderful, just wonderful. And I'm so excited to be involved with Great Tree. That's all.
Well, and I also, let me just say too, because I've spoken with a lot of people about this, even just recently, and one of the messages that comes back to me over and over again is that even in the midst of all this ritual and formality and trying to do things right, this gets to have the flavor of Great Tree, right? This is yours. This is what this ritual looks like inside of your container. And so there's this great creative freedom there as well, to really meet this and bring the spirit of your community into the spirit of this tradition. And I think we can lose sight of that too when we're looking at the lists of things and it feels overwhelming. It's an encounter.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Morning. I have a comment and a question. Hearing Tejo talk about coming to practice through by way of Catholicism, I have a similar route. I am Episcopalian and was speaking with a friend who is being installed as a priest at a church near here. It's actually 3 churches together, and they are struggling with how to do this in a way that combines elements of all 3. So they've decided to bring objects from each of the other parishes, and they will all be incorporated, and there will be elements of all of them in this one ceremony that will embody the entire community. So I think hearing that there is a similarity or an echo of what you have been speaking of, but in terms of the callback, the number of priests in the ceremony being a callback, it reminds me also of the tradition I grew up in. Numbers were important, and I kept thinking, I wonder if he's going to talk about the significance of the number. But would you have a bit to say about what the origin of that is and how it might be important now, or if it is that thing between holding loosely and clinging?
Right. So, and I'm no expert here, and I have notes on this, but I don't have them in front of me. But essentially, my understanding is that the process of full ordination that I think really took shape in Theravada Buddhism, and and carried over into China. Most of the Chinese, maybe all of the Chinese ancestors that we read about would have undergone what we call platform ordination. There's literally a platform, and the novice goes there. And I don't really remember much about what it looked like, but the important part was that there were minimum numbers of other monks that have to be present. And this is still so relevant today because conservatives in the Buddhist world who insist that women can't be ordained do so on the grounds that in order to perform platform ordination properly, you must have a certain number of nuns in order to ordain a nun. And if you can't ordain the first one anymore because they're lines that died out, then you can never have that number again, so you can never do that ordination again. So it's done. And they insist it's over, which is obviously opens up a whole big conversation. But it's still a very hot topic, this idea of the numbers. But it goes back to this, centuries-long tradition of the novice who is receiving full ordination being surrounded by a certain number of peers. And I think what I want to say is that it was 10. And it's not just that there are people in the room, it's a very physical, it's a container, right? You're actually kind of wrapping around this person. You're holding them in this space. I'll add to this that another requirement of this is that one of the 12 be someone who serves as what's called the Seido. The Seido is, practically speaking, kind of the Soto Zen version of a notary public. They have a certain rank, they have certain qualifications, and they need to be in the room for certain ceremonies in order for certain ceremonies to have really taken place. Right? They have to just witness it. And so at Great Tree as well, there are a couple of people in North America who can serve as a Seido. In our case, one of my teachers is coming from Japan because he serves in that role and wanted to come. But that's part of it too, that there's someone in the room who is at a different level and is standing witness to what's happening and saying, this is real, this is authentic, as a kind of through line through the tradition and through the generations. Say, someone has always stood here, someone has always served this function of signing off and saying, this, you're not making this up, right? You're not claiming something for yourself that wasn't offered. This is absolutely, irrefutably authentic.
It's just a few minutes before 11.
Yeah.
So if somebody has something pressing they want to bring up, please bring it up. Otherwise, we can just give back the merit. Okay, and thank you so much. This has been really great, and I hope that it recorded.
Yeah, it's recording.
Good.
Thank you. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be with all of you. It's been a while, but I really, really enjoy it. And I wish you all the best this coming year, trying to work through all this stuff together.
You too.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we do call and response. May the
Okay.
merit of this practice
May the merit of this
This
practice
benefit all beings
benefit all beings
and bring peace.
and bring peace.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
So I didn't go into the chat again. No. It might be too late.
You can check on the recording.
You can see on the recording how many people were there.
Okay, so how do I do that? Did you turn off the recording?
Not yet.
Okay. We gotta stop.
You want me to?
Yes, turn off the recording. Oh, I don't mean end the meeting. Well, that's okay.
I think it'll do, they don't end the recording.
Yeah, well. Okay.